The population I will be discussing today for environmental and cultural factors is refugees. A health concern for refugees would be racism, discrimination, and violence. As racism and discrimination have been ongoing issues, when you have individuals from other countries that enter a new country, it may be difficult to understand and acknowledge differences, and these differences of culture can often lead to racism and violence. In the media, the representation of refugees is oftentimes inadequate or over exaggerated. The media has a powerful influence to either increase concern or spread misinformation. It is often biased and hinders efforts to bring awareness to issues and truth. And these inaccuracies can decrease the amount of help that is contributed to the refugees. It can both be accurate and inaccurate. Photographs can be warped to over exaggerate the situation or show the true crisis and have a powerful impact. Media outlets should also be covering the positive stories about the refugee crisis, because this positive coverage ensures more humanitarian packages to refugees. So with family support for refugees is very important. The lack of family support and coming over to a new country without family can lead to greater integration challenges and also can decrease their access to healthcare, as there's many individuals alone by themselves. And this can also increase their PTSD, anxiety, and they can have other mental health problems. So the role of peers is very important in these refugee children especially, and peers can either be helpful or hurtful, and these refugees have a longing for acceptance by their peers, and it can be difficult to find a balance to the culture that they left behind in the new culture while trying to fit in. And if students do not get involved with activities outside their homes and learn about the culture they are now living in, it makes it almost impossible to embrace this new culture. And they can have a loss of identity and begin to participate in risky behaviors. Intergenerational trauma is often experienced by refugees. They can have trauma experienced in one generation that can continue to affect future generations, and this trauma can be passed from parents to children. Even if the children did not experience the trauma, it can be passed down from generations. This increases the risk of psychological outcomes and psychosocial stress. So the Refugee Act of 1980 prioritized admissions to the most vulnerable and helped refugees to attain economic self-sufficiency. And the Refugee Resettlement Program protects the vulnerable population and long-term integration to obtain economic self-sufficiency as quickly as possible. And resettlement agencies help to place these refugees, and then once they are placed, they leave it up to individual states and communities to help with the refugees. And there is often variation in local and state resources according to what they have available. And this Refugee Act helps with employment and income. And then in 2015, because of the heightened concerns of national security, this led to a travel ban on many parts of Africa and Middle Eastern countries. And this implementation cut the number of refugees entering the U.S. By 2017 in more than half. And this was due to an executive order during the Trump administration. However, this also allows states to be more involved with the resettlement of refugees. So, some potential barriers for refugees can be religion, culture, and stigmas. Um, Religion is often a barrier because everyone believes that all refugees are Muslims, and some countries aren't willing to accept them. And then cultural differences can be hard to accept. There's often other cultures have arranged marriages, female genitalia cutting, and headscarves that aren't commonly used in other cultures. And stigmas that are often addressed is terrorists. There's a lot leading for people to believe that all refugees are terrorists, so it has become quite the stigma. So for the international scope, there are many different restrictions of health services, and some of these services don't even allow refugees to get any medical attention whatsoever. And then others allow just beyond emergency services, whereas some countries allow complete access to services similar to those of their own nations. And these restrictions were put into place in 2010 by different countries. And health often remains marginal in broader discussions on refugees, and they are frequently forgotten in health strategies. However, with increasing acceptance by states of their responsibility for ensuring health and human rights, fears about threats of infection are gradually giving way to a desire to treat both communicable diseases and the broader health program problems that are arriving with refugees. In the US, the states are doing a lot to help with the health of refugees. However, in other countries, it's still lacking. And the WHO says that 85% of refugees are hosted in developing countries, and this is causing them to be hosted in housing that is a threat to their physical health. And these physical elements can lead to illness and possible death. And these economic concerns for refugees are often unemployment, and it's related to the language barrier, poor education, and these barriers can lead to low-paying jobs, so they aren't able to sustain themselves, causing them to continue in the cycle of low socioeconomic status. So race and ethnicity is a problem with refugees, and it has led to a decrease in access to public services and healthcare, just based on their race and ethnicity. This is often due because of social segregation, and having housing in poor places, and they aren't able to receive healthcare, and they are often housed in far away outer cities, far from good schools, hospitals, and public transportation, so they lack resources and the availability to them. Religion has become the primary characteristic by which refugees are imagined and understood. There are many false assumptions regarding refugees, especially Syrian refugees. Some of these false assumptions are all refugees are Muslim, all Muslim in the same way, and refugees are Muslim and Muslims are terrorists. And since the majority of refugees are from countries where Islam is the dominant religion, everyone assumes they must be Muslim. And all Muslim in the same way is they all believe the same, they all practice the same rituals, and other countries do not like this. And they believe they're all terrorists and don't want them in their countries and try and do everything possible to block them from entering their country. And in Australia, they will only accept Christian refugees. So, through research, I found that they haven't done many studies regarding gender inequality and refugees, but I did find that there's an increased violence towards women. And this occurs commonly because they're traveling alone, they're separated at borders from their families, and they're traveling with only children. And they're often used for sexual abuse and use transactional sex to be able to get help more quickly from detention centers, and the smugglers and traffickers will require them sex acts to be able to smuggle them into a different country in return for their assistance. So, high income countries relocate a small percentage of refugees, and developing regions host about 85% of refugees, as I said earlier. And the increase of cost of living has pushed refugees out of urban areas into smaller communities with more limited resources. And the refugees living in smaller communities with limited access to healthcare could greatly benefit from the use of telehealth to ensure appropriate access to healthcare. And these developing regions also have limited access to health care, and telehealth would be appropriate to help them. So there are many different biases. Implicit is you would be unaware of the bias, but you often don't realize it's happening. Like if you were trying to help refugees, but in the back of your mind, you're thinking about their race and religion. That can lead to some biases that you're unaware of until you're helping them. And this can be different. It can be race, culture, language, gender, and there's several others it could be. And then explicit is you're aware of the bias, and they've kind of been created by others, assuming that everyone's a rapist or a terrorist, or they're criminals, drug dealers, human traffickers. These are common threads of what others believe that refugees are, and so then we now have these biases. So policies in national governments have helped to ensure the rights of refugees and help to assist them with essential factors such as food, shelter, health services, and opportunities for livelihoods, and along with education and the ability to earn livelihoods. And like I said, most of these refugees are in developing countries, and so they can have limited access to shelter and clean water and food, and as well as education, and so they are disproportionately served due to not having resources available. And here are my references.